Joining us now is Senator Marco Rubio. Senator, thank you for the time and for joining the show again. Just a quick reaction, if you will, from the U.S. Secret Service committee hearing. I know you were in another committee hearing, but this really is the viral news right now. Any reaction to the handling of the Secret Service's events post-Butler?
Well, I'm glad to see that he said the Secret Service is to blame and isn't putting it on the local police departments. Look, my view from the beginning has been, knowing the threats that exist against Donald Trump from foreign governments like Iran, that the protection that they had given him was not commensurate to the threat. And it is also, you don't have to be a security expert to know that a sniper on top of a rooftop is the quintessential, like the most risky of all threats that you face in an environment like the one the President Trump was in. It should have been the number one priority in terms of securing perimeter and the like. So clearly they failed. And the question is, why did they fail? And is that failure the result of an individual who's incompetent, who sounds like they're still on the job? Or is it a systemic problem within the agency that it's basically not good at its job? It's not doing a good enough job at catching things like this. The bottom line is that under no circumstances should there have been a guy on a rooftop with a sniper rifle who was known to law enforcement hours before the rally, and no one did anything about it. The answer to that is not to have some counter sniper ready to take him out after he's fired 7 or 8 shots. The answer is to never let him get up there in the first place, and if he gets up there, not to allow Trump to take the stage until he's removed. And why that didn't happen, why they're communicating using text messages, that's how we communicate, that's how we protect people. And look, whether you like Trump or not, obviously I'm a supporter of Donald Trump, but let's say someone's watching, maybe you have viewers somewhere that doesn't like Trump or doesn't support him. This is about protecting the country. Can you imagine where this country is right now and the damage it would have done to America had President Trump gotten his head blown off on national television, broadcast to the world? Can you just, apart from the human tragedy, and we already had a human tragedy because someone died at that rally and 2 others were seriously injured, but can you imagine what would have happened if he had been assassinated, the damage it would have done to America? This is unacceptable, and someone needs to be held responsible and accountable. We have to make sure that whatever it is that led to this never happens again. We can't afford it as a country.
That's right. The civilization would be still in chaos. The weeks later, we would be in a place we've never been before. Speaking of chaos, Senator, it seems as if what happens in Venezuela, they're trying to bring to this country. You represent a lot of Venezuelan Americans in South Florida. This is an issue that I know you've been studying. It has not been front page news for Americans, but it should be. Can you just quickly walk through the recent events of what has been happening in Venezuela? It is very applicable to what we're going through right now.
Well, first of all, we have to stop talking about the Maduro regime as a government. It is not a government. It's not. It's a narco-terrorist organization who makes money off drug trafficking, is in bed with Iran, is like Iran's foothold in the hemisphere. They do deals with Iran, with China, with Russia, with drug trafficking networks. And they're a disaster economically. They destroyed the country. They basically have this is a criminal organization that's empowered itself of a very wealthy country. And so the result is 8 million Venezuelans have left there in the last decade, many of them headed here and in other parts of the world. And they've been driving that. Trump put on very strong sanctions. Biden comes in and says, we will lift the sanctions and we will send you 2 convicted drug dealers, sitting in federal prison, who are nephews of Maduro. Biden released them. He also released the #1 money launderer, someone who the Trump administration went to great lengths to have him extradited to the United States when he was apprehended in Africa. They released all these bad guys in exchange for a promise to have free and fair elections, which they were never going to do. Well, they stole the elections. Basically, they won't release the precinct level count. Think about that. We're only going to tell you the final outcome, but we're not going to show you precinct by precinct the outcome. Everybody knows that he lost that election. And now, the guy's trying to hold on to power, and he's laughing at us. And the Biden-Harris administration were clowned again on foreign policy. And by the way, lifted oil sanctions on them because we wanted to buy more of their oil, but we won't let our own companies produce here at home. So it's a fiasco all the way around. And you're absolutely right. It is another reminder that everywhere where socialism is, always winds up with the same thing: poverty and tyranny. That's the result of socialism everywhere. Look at our border. They come from Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. All these are socialist countries. People flee those countries. Why the hell would we ever want that in America?
Not to mention, this is also is a story of election integrity and not having transparent elections, is that illegitimate regimes try to put forward elections that do not have trust and do not have transparency. The Venezuelan story also is very chilling because we've seen the response from protesters in the streets that are now just being rounded up, being shot at by this basically a military junta that controls Venezuela. If President Trump is to win in January, what should the U.S. response be to, as you say, this narco state that calls itself the Venezuelan government?
Well, understand, I care deeply about this issue. And I always tell people the answer to what happens in Venezuela ultimately resides inside of Venezuela with their own people who very bravely, as you said, are taking to the streets and have for many years and done things about it. But we have our national security interests. Venezuela is an enemy. The Maduro regime is an enemy of the United States. They buy weapons from Iran. They help Iran evade sanctions. Hezbollah, their trafficking networks and their activity in the hemisphere is headquartered out of Venezuela. It begins there. The Chinese are heavily involved in Venezuela. The Russians are heavily involved there. So all of our enemies rely on Venezuela as like their foothold in the hemisphere. They have also, because of what they've done, and we never had immigrants from Venezuela. It was one of the richest countries in the world. And now, we have hundreds of thousands winding up at our border. 8 million have left the country over the last 10 years. So they've also created this migratory crisis, which, by the way, you're going to see another 2-3 million people leave as a result of the stolen election. So it's creating a tremendous migratory catastrophe. In addition to that, Maduro has exported this gang, Tren de Aragua, which now is in the United States after terrorizing Peru and Ecuador and Colombia. They're behind a lot of these crimes that we've seen here in the streets. These are criminals that were criminals in Venezuela. The vast majority of Venezuelans that are here are very decent people who don't want to live in a socialist country, but these criminals are part of the group that's coming in. And all of this created by them. They're enemies of the United States, avowed enemies of the United States, and now apparently at war also with Elon Musk. I don't know if you saw, Maduro says that Musk wants to invade with his rockets. I don't know. He's the guy's a weirdo too, but Maduro is a strange guy. He says strange things. But look, they're enemies of the United States, and we need to adjust accordingly. And I think that Trump had put in place very powerful sanctions. He was very tough on them, and he never would have released those drug dealers and cut a deal like this one. It's a terrible deal. They got clowned again. Biden, Harris got clowned again.
We must defeat Ms. Harris coming up in November, and part of that is the ticket Trump-Vance. Senator, you took to Twitter this weekend, and we were texting about it, defending JD Vance against some of the very nasty attacks that were launched against him. I want to thank you for doing that for many reasons, because it was very credible coming from you the way you did it, because you were a finalist for Trump's vice president. And you said, look, any one of us that would have gotten selected would have experienced this type of treatment. Can you elaborate on that, Senator?
Yeah, there's two reasons why. The first is that's what always makes me laugh. I go back to 2008. I remember the day after John McCain, who was a darling of the media for much of his career, but the minute he became the Republican nominee, I think it was like a day or two later, the New York Times ran this scandalous, outrageous story that turned out to be discredited, that he was basically implying he was having affairs with lobbyists. They attacked him immediately. Think about the things they accused Mitt Romney of. They accused Mitt Romney of not respecting women, of all kinds of things that they accused him of being some sort of out of touch guy that didn't like working people and so forth. They called George W. Bush a war criminal. So any Republican, they're going to smear. I don't care who you are. And the only difference is, Trump is like the first one that kind of gave it back to them in equal measure, and they don't like that. So whoever he would have picked as vice president, there would have been different stories, but it would have been the same line of attack. And part of the reason for that is that Kamala Harris is indefensible. Look, here's the truth. Go back. Everybody should read this New York Times article, very well-sourced article. Jonathan Martin, I think, wrote it along with another reporter. And it talked about how Biden appointed this independent committee to help him pick a VP. And Kamala Harris was neither the candidate who most impressed them, nor the person that the advisors on that committee thought was prepared to be president. And then she was a disaster when she took vice president. She was a disaster when she was in the Senate. The huge levels of internal staff turnover. She had this disastrous trip to Central America that led to all kinds of backbiting. So those are facts. And those are things that have been laid out in her career. She ran for president. Her campaign was a disaster. She didn't even make it to December, I don't think. And then she got in the vice presidency, which she wasn't the most qualified person. I'm not saying that. The Biden people said that. And disaster there as well. So they don't want to talk about it. So she's going to get this honeymoon where the media is just going to build her up. And we knew that was going to happen. But I truly believe that when all is said and done, particularly after Labor Day, after their convention, it's going to come down to something very simple. Everything Joe Biden has done that's damaged this country, Kamala Harris was there for it and supported it. And in fact, I would say that Joe Biden's career, for the most part, until recently, was that he was sort of like a 20th century Democrat. the liberals, the far left, they sort of rented Joe Biden. They put up with him. And one of the reasons why they wanted them there for so long is because of his lack of mental acuity allowed him to get away with things. She's actually a real deal leftist, left-wing Democrat, who supported some of the most radical policies one can imagine as recently as 2020, ran for president. And she should be held to account for that. We should be focused on that. Eventually, the media will have to get to that. But first, they're going to smear JD Vance, as they would have smeared anybody else that Trump would have picked.
We only have 1 minute here, Senator, because we've covered so much ground. But can you please just tease our audience on the ActBlue story? Your leadership on that topic has been terrific and much appreciated.
Yeah, in the back of everyone's credit card, we get asked for it all the time. There's this code called the CVV code, and it allows you to track that account and where it's located. And ActBlue, we use it. When Red uses it, everybody else uses it. But you can donate money, thousands of dollars to ActBlue without your CVV code on it. And so I want to pass a law that requires that all these online donations using credit cards require a CVV, so we can make sure that that person is actually in the United States and eligible to contribute. Otherwise, you could have some credit card in China basically putting millions of dollars in small dollar donations into political campaigns in America. ActBlue has become a money laundering operation, and because they don't take the CVV. It's a deliberate strategy on their part. We should have a law that closes that. I've been trying to get it passed, and as you can imagine, the reason the Democrats oppose it is because ActBlue opposes it. Because if they had to put CVVs, they had to use that code from their credit card, their donations would go.
I think you're onto something, Senator, here. I really believe that there is a flow of tens of millions of dollars of foreign money that is coming into our election system in hard money, small dollar chunks via ActBlue. That's just a suspicion. It feels that way. It seems that way. There's too many pieces of evidence. And I hope you stay on the case there, Senator, because I believe if we're able to stop that, the Democrats will lose a lot of their cash advantage. Senator, thank you for your leadership. Hope to see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Charlie.